Well, hey there. Welcome to the Horrible Movie Podcast. My name is Jack. Thanks for tuning in and downloading. Today, you're going to hear a great conversation with Fabian Nicieza, the Marvel Comics legend, co-creator of Deadpool, co-creator or creator of many Marvel Comics characters, and if he's not created or had a hand in creating those teams or those characters, he's written for a title of someone from Marvel Comics and from DC Comics as well. And he's got a lot of great stories. You hear a great origin story for Fabian. He's a guy that moved to America from another country, and you get to hear all about adapting to moving to a new country. You get to hear about their early years at Marvel, working with Stan Lee, working with so many other greats. And I'm telling you, you're going to get a lot of great inside information on Marvel, a lot of great inside DC Comics information. And you're also going to hear, does Fabian like the Deadpool movies? You're also going to hear, does Fabian like Return of the Jedi and Star Wars in general? And you're just going to hear a lot of awesome stuff. So stay tuned. Make sure, guys, subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to it anywhere you get your podcasts. It may be Spotify. It may be iHeartRadio. And just anywhere you can get them. Spreaker.com. Also, check us out on Twitter at OneHorribleMovie. Go to our Facebook page and like us and follow us over there. Thanks so much. And without further ado, Fabian Nicieza talking Deadpool and so many other things. Without further ado, here we go. We'll just jump into it, Fabian.
Okay.
And it's, Nicieza, right?
Very close, almost exactly. Nicieza.
Nicieza. Is that
Nicieza?
Nicieza. Okay.
In Spanish, it's Fabian Nicieza.
Okay.
In English, it's Fabian Nicieza or Nicieza. And in American, it's usually Fabian Nicieza.
Why is it that? I saw that on your Twitter, and I was like, that's so funny. Why? Because people just like, oh.
Well, because Americans can't put vowels together without needing to throw consonants in there, and they get very scared. They're scared of vowels.
Listen to you. That's exactly, you're explaining exactly. Phil always says, you're just so cultured, the things you say. Like he's being facetious. Because anytime we do a movie that has anyone from Asia on it, I just butcher it, man. Like it's brutal. We're recording from around Springfield, Missouri, so we are in the Ozarks, Fabian. We are.
Yeah, but no, butchering my name has absolutely nothing to do with geographical region or cultural background or racial or religious backgrounds. All of you are capable of butchering it equally. It's the only thing that's bringing our nation together is butchering my name on an equal basis.
USA. Yes,
USA.
Well, I appreciate
it was amazing. I did a couple international cons last year, and I was like in Paris, and I was in Spain and Madrid, and it was such a pleasure to hear everyone pronounce my name smoothly without a problem, without an issue whatsoever at all. And then I came back and did a con like a week later here in the States. It was right back to it all over again.
Here we go. It's Fabian, everybody.
Fabian.
That's Fabian.
So what United States cons are you usually doing?
Actually, I got 3 this month. It got booked up. I have West Palm Comic-Con Revolution in West Palm Beach this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. I have River Region in Montgomery, Alabama, which is I think a Saturday, one day only. It's a Saturday-Sunday show, but I'm only going to be there Saturday. That's on the 16th, the 17th. Hold on, the week after, 23rd maybe. Wait, I'm going to my calendar now. I'm sorry. The River Region is on the 16th, and then I have Planet Comic-Con Kansas City, the 29th, the 30th, and the 31st.
Cool, and we will definitely see you there. So.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, we do.
It's my first time going. I don't think I've done a signing in Kansas City since like the early '90s, so it's my first time in that area in a little while.
It's a really great con, and there's just
I heard great things about it.
Yeah, we always do a panel there. Like we've done a panel the last like 4 years there, so it's great. It's great stuff. Well, let's just jump in. You talked about you were born in Buenos Aires, Argentina.
Yes, I
Okay,
was.
and your family came to America. You moved to New Jersey. I mean, you know, tell us a little
My
bit about
dad,
that.
my dad had my dad was an engineer, a chemistry major in college, but he was an engineer by trade, and he also was an artist. He loved to paint and draw and sculpt. So he wanted to try to merge the two, and he started a factory in Argentina that created bone china porcelain statues and art, statuary artwork, all different sizes, and there were some gorgeous pieces. But and I was, you're talking about me being born and being 1, 2 years old. I don't know the details. I
Right.
just know that the factory didn't succeed, and he had to close it down.
Yeah.
And in his tempestuous Argentinian nature, he said, "My dreams can't come true in this country. I have to leave this country." And, and his sister was already living in New York City because her husband was in international banking out of Manhattan, but they are both Argentinians. And so his sister, my aunt, sponsored him to come to the country.
Okay.
So he got a green card. He came to the country. He got a job. Then he brought three of us, my brother, my older brother, myself, and my mom came about 6, 8 months later, all in 1966.
Wow.
So he came at the beginning of 1966, got a job. He didn't know much English at all, barely any, but he got a job, and then he brought us. And we came in, I think, August of 1966, and lived in Queens, in Forest Hill, Queens, right near the World's Fair, the old World's Fair site, and right near Queens Boulevard. And we were there from 66 to 68, and then he got another job he started working for Remco, which was a toy company. Then he got a job at Mattel, and Mattel had a factory in Edison, New Jersey. So we had to move to New Jersey. So we moved to a town in New Jersey called Sayreville, which is where John Bon Jovi's from.
Oh, wow.
So we lived in Sayreville most of my elementary school years until 6th grade. And I started school here in the United States. I think I did preschool in Argentina, but I started kindergarten and 1st grade here in the United States, and 2nd grade in New Jersey. I don't have many memories of Queens. I have barely any memories at all of my 1st grade year because I was transitioning in language.
Right.
I was learning English, and my brain had to rewire itself to think in English as opposed to Spanish. So I don't remember 1st grade much, but that's when we started getting comic books when we lived in Queens. And continued to get comic books. Just we didn't have much allowance money, and you had to also make sure you got baseball cards and candy. So
Yeah,
and
exactly.
movies.
The
We only got a couple comics a month, and they were pretty expensive back then. They were 12 cents. So we my brother and I would each get 1 or 2 a piece, and then we'd share them. So we would read 4, but each of us only paid for 1 or 2 out of our own allowance. So at a certain point, I was always getting the Avengers every month, and then sporadic other stuff. I picked Avengers because they're the ones that had the most characters in it. We like Spider-Man, we like Fantastic Four, but I liked Avengers because it had 6 or 7 characters in it, which meant I was getting more bang for my buck, more bang for my 15 cents.
There you go.
The price went up at that point. And my brother would get Spider-Man or Fantastic Four, and then he latched on to Defenders as his book. He really liked Defenders. So for a while there, I was getting Avengers every month. He was getting Defenders every month. And then I would pick up other stuff that interested me, all in the early 70s. And I still got almost all those comic books. I don't have the original New York City comic books. That was a small little stack my mom threw out when we moved to New Jersey. All that included was like the Galactus trilogy and
Oh, wow.
the introduction. So Spider-Man issues in the 50s and 60s, like issue numbers 50s and 60s. So she threw out all of that stuff when we moved. But then we started up again in New Jersey, and I've kept them ever since. So in my basement, I got a bunch of comics I've had since 1968 or so.
Mm-hmm. Did you so when you were buying Avengers when you were young, did you ever imagine that you would create the Avengers ID, the Avengers ID card?
No, I didn't. No, but that was one of the first things I did when I became an advertising manager because I thought it was a really, really cool promo. No, I realized I wanted to be a writer when I was around 10 or 11 years old. I drew, but I really liked writing, coming up with stories and ideas and characters. So I drew for the sake of my writing more than to become an artist. So I would draw as a means of expressing what I had in mind for a story or a character visually. And then as I got a little older into my teenage years, I started to do panel-to-panel breakdown. I can still break down a page pretty well. I can tell a story. I just am not a good enough artist to draw it. And I've done a lot of cover sketches in my time in advertising, design sketches for the artists, the real good artists, to then make it work. But I've been pretty proud of the fact that a lot of the times I've done layouts, the artists have really liked them and gone right along with what I had in mind. And we're talking big name artists, we're talking Alan Davis, John Byrne, a whole bunch of big guys who would get my sketch and go, okay, yeah, this works. I just want to do this and this, and I go, of course, whatever, and then they would produce the piece. But I always wanted to be a writer, so. But I realized that in order to become a writer, you probably need to be an old man, because the pictures on the backs of the paperback books I was reading, all those guys looked like they were 35 or so. So when I was a teenager, I thought you had to be an old man.
When you were reading, like, what are some of your the people you would read, as far as you're talking about regular novels? You're talking about just books in general, right?
Yeah, I would go through almost OCD phases. Like when I was in elementary school, it was Hardy Boys. When I was in middle school, 7th and 8th grade, for some reason, I just latched on to Doc Savage and Conan. Yeah. And I read, I don't know, 50 Doc Savage books. I still have them in a box in the basement. I read almost all the Conan stuff because I got into the comic first, and then I got the books. And then it was Stephen King and Clive Cussler, who wrote Raise the Titanic. Right. I read a bunch of his books. And then anything I had to read for school, I would read without a problem. And I always, as I got older, then in college, I had to read a lot because I was taking a lot of English was my minor. And I had to take a lot of courses that required a lot of reading. So Agatha Christie and science fiction books. I don't even retain the memory of a lot of those science fiction books. Heinlein and Asimov and things like that.
Cool.
And I read almost everything Stephen King did for a good 5, 6, 7 years until I sort of just got a little tired of it and moved away from it.
What was your favorite Stephen King?
Probably The Stand is my favorite Stephen King book by far, probably because it's the most ambitious of almost all of his novels. Which did I like? I like Carrie a lot, and I like The Shining, although not as much. But yeah, probably The Stand is my favorite.
Did you ever watch the made-for-TV movie Langoliers?
No, I haven't. No.
It has the worst CGI you've ever seen, Fabian.
Then why would I want to watch it?
Well, it's got Bronson.
It's like you're offering me food and telling me this is the worst thing you're ever going to taste.
Listen, hey, take a bite of this sandwich, Fabian. It's the worst thing you've ever tasted.
Whoops! My first bleep of the day.
I know. It's okay. It'll be fine.
Take a bite of this poop sandwich. There you go.
Isn't it the worst? There's a little corn in there. It's fine. Sorry, I digress a lot. So, you studied advertising and public relations in college as a Scarlet Knight at Rutgers.
Yes, a Rutgers Scarlet Knight. Hey, we got 6 Big Ten wins in basketball this year. That's more than we've ever had.
That's awesome. Great defense.
I wanted to be a writer, but I realized in high school that you had to be old. So if I couldn't become a writer till I was 35, when I was old, then I needed to get a job that would allow me to express myself in some capacity that involved writing and exposed me to people that might give me an opportunity to become a writer. So I realized that I liked advertising and I liked marketing and that involved writing and public relations. All of that involved writing, so I became a communications major.
Cool.
And they had 4 different tracks you could take to be a communications major. I took the public relations and advertising track. But there was also organizational communication tracks and public policy communication tracks, and you had to take some courses in all of that stuff. So it exposed me to a few different things, which inevitably all of it ended up impacting my work experience in the future, which rarely happens for a lot of people in college. But I couldn't get a job in advertising out of college because most of those jobs required you basically to be able to type X amount of words a minute, and I'm not a professional typist. And I got so tired of the kinds of interviews I was going on for advertising jobs that I ended up just rewriting their typing test because I didn't like the way it was written and submitting it, knowing I had no shot in getting the job. So I ended up getting a job at a paperback book publisher, which was Berkeley Publishing, in 1983. And again, it's the opportunity to try to, it gives me a shot to try to become a writer. I'll get to know the editors, I'll get to see the kinds of books they do and they like, and I'll try to write something to them. I like the job a lot, and I like the people there tremendously. There's still people working there today who I worked with in 1983,
wow.
84.
Cool.
Yeah, like the vice president, executive editor of the whole company started about 3-4 months after I did. I had planned to begin to start writing samples for the different kinds of genre series that Berkeley did. They had like a Nick Carter spy series and a couple Western series, Long Arm and Gunsmiths, maybe Gun something. And they were multiple writers because it was a monthly series with a pseudonym. And they would buy manuscripts from multiple writers because they had to. It was like a sausage grind. You had to churn it out constantly every month. And they were very formulaic, a very structured story, and you had to have at least 2 to 3 sexual encounters in each novel.
Interesting.
Because they were light softcore porn for male readers. And they paid about $500 a book, which is really like scale basically back then.
Yeah.
But it's a good way to learn, to get some practice under your belt, to prove to the editors that you can do good, solid work. And then I would try to sell my own book. You know what I mean?
Right.
And right as I was ready to begin drafting sample chapters of these genre series for the editors at Berkeley, is when I found out that from a friend of a friend on the Berkeley Putnam softball team knew someone at Putnam whose sister worked at Marvel, and she was looking to hire an assistant in the manufacturing department. And I said, okay. I interviewed at both Marvel and DC out of college, and I didn't get either job for valid reasons. They hired people who had a little more experience at that point for the jobs that I was interviewing for. So I wanted to work at Marvel or DC. I got an interview at Marvel. She hired me for the job, but it was in the manufacturing department, and that meant Marvel press posters and the Fisher-Price books that Marvel was doing back then, which was coloring books, activity books. It was part of a Fisher-Price licensing deal they had. And I knew that that's not what I wanted to do with my career or my life, but I wanted to get my foot in the door. So I did. And 4 months later, I stabbed the poor woman in the back who hired me because the promotions department, a guy in the promotions department who was the person who got hired instead of me in 1983 was looking to hire an assistant.
Yes.
And that was Steve Saffel, who was the promotions manager at Marvel at that time. He hired me to be his assistant, not knowing that at the same time he was getting someone hired over him to be a director of publicity and promotion at Marvel. And that guy was named Mark Erickson. And so in 1986, early 1986, I became the promotion department, the promotion and publicity department assistant. And after 12 months, Mark was going to make a decision about how he was going to structure his department once he got to know everybody. And within 12 months, he saw what our strengths were. So he made Steve the promotions manager responsible for conventions and press relations with the direct market. And he made me the advertising manager responsible for all of Marvel's house ads, co-op ads, subscription ads, promotional posters, sell sheets, promotional giveaways, all that stuff. So that's what I did while Steve did what he did. And we worked together on a lot of stuff, but each of us had our own responsibilities and each of us had manager titles. So I became Marvel's promotion manager officially, I think it was January 1987. And one of, like you said, one of the first things I did, I forget when Solo Avengers was, but we were putting out Solo Avengers, and I thought I didn't have a big budget to promote that book, so I had to really try to be smart about how I was going to choose to promote certain things. And the card, a two-sided card, was a really cost-effective way to spend the promotional dollars. So I decided, let me take advantage of something that the stores are going to love, which is an Avengers ID card. And on the back of that card, I'll promote Solo Avenger, so everyone in the store will get one. And it was a great bit. It worked out great. That's my signature on the card itself, in place of Raymond Sikorsky, who was
isn't Ronald Reagan's signature on it as well?
Yeah. I clipped that from a newspaper. This is the pre-internet, so you had to find his signature. And I think the newspaper ran a bill he signed or something, and I clipped it out of that.
There you go.
So I actually I clipped it myself, and I put it on the mechanical myself, because I also signed it directly on the mechanical myself, that we were shooting, the camera was going to shoot. So Raymond Sikorsky is my handwriting, and Ronald Reagan was cut out of a newspaper or a magazine.
Kids don't really have appreciation for the kind of cutting and pasting that we had to kind of do pre-internet, pre-Microsoft
not at all.
Word.
No, they also have no idea. I'm jaded and take advantage of the internet and the ability to research and reference things as quickly as we can now.
Yes.
But they have zero idea what it would take to have to go through magazines to find the right photograph, or encyclopedias to find a biographical photograph of somebody, or even a celebrity photograph. If you wanted to have a reference for what someone looked like, you can do that in seconds now. And for us, it could have taken days to do,
Exactly. It's like just the weirdest thing. Phil and I are both in education. I've taught for 17 years, and it's one of those things where I was telling a student today about, before there was texting, before there was internet, like you just kind of lived this blissful life of, hey, it's a nice quiet day. What are we going to go do? Not stare at my phone all day long. So.
But just to put it in perspective, though, guys, Millard Fillmore was the first president who could take a dump in the White House and flush it. Before that, all of the presidents, including, by the way, our founding fathers, had to walk outside and go take a dump in an outhouse.
There you go.
So Thomas Jefferson is taking a poop in an outhouse behind the White House. Okay.
That's true. We do not appreciate the modern technologies.
No, we don't. We certainly do not appreciate the ability to flush our sewage.
Yes, or to manually cut and paste Ronald Reagan's signature on an Avengers ID card,
bringing it smoothly back around.
So
out of the toilet, Fabian.
So at this point, obviously you're not living your dream as a writer per se, but you've got a job that would be heavily envied by.
I liked it more than writing, guys. I loved that job. I loved working there. It was a great time. There was a huge amount of turmoil because Shooter was having editorial problems, both within his department and between himself and higher ups, but after he was fired, that time period. And I like Jim a lot, and I respect Jim tremendously. But it was time for him to go in order for the company to try to move forward in a different direction.
Gotcha.
After he left, when Tom became editor-in-chief and Mark Grunwald became executive editor, it was, and I'm not joking, it was like a golden age for that company.
That's
from
cool.
88 to 92 or so, before the Perlman Group bought Marvel and started to get way too involved in the decisions that were happening and placing too many of their people in positions of authority. Before that happened, so 88-ish to 92 was just a great time, and anybody who worked there, for the most part, will feel the same way, that it was the best work experience they ever had.
That's awesome.
It was a really, really good time. Barriers broke down between departments. I do feel I had a heavy hand in that, because I as advertising manager, I had to work in conjunction with almost every single department, and editorial and direct sales, which had a lot of problems before that. A lot of walls broke down because direct sales got some new personnel involved that were much more much more capable of socially interacting with other people from other departments.
Gotcha.
So everybody just started to get along better. Everyone did. It was, and I'm not kidding. It was almost like the sun coming up in the company.
And
Mark Tom was a great editor in chief, and Mark was a great executive editor. That they kept everything real professional and real business-like, but also understanding that we were supposed to be having fun and we were supposed to be enjoying what we were doing, because that would reflect itself in the comics. So we had a tremendous amount of fun. We caused a lot of trouble. We went out after work a tremendous amount and did things we shouldn't have done to our bodies.
The camaraderie when you work at a place you love and enjoy, that camaraderie, I mean, that's what makes it awesome.
Yeah, and it was great. It was a really great window. It really fell apart quickly. Post 92 got harder and harder for a lot of reasons.
More cooks in the kitchen, that kind of situation.
Well, the Perlman Group started putting more of. They initially put some of their C-level people into place, thinking that it wasn't that we were a C-level acquisition.
Wow.
But then when they started making tremendous amounts of money off of us, they started to try to put their B-level people in place, and their B-level people had zero interest to really. They didn't care about Marvel. They just cared about the money they could be making off of Marvel.
Jeez.
And that started to cause problems. That's when that's when all the stuff happened with instead of having one special cover every quarter, we ended up having 4 special covers every month. Prices on the book started to go up when we put special covers on them. That's when the Heroes World debacle happened, when they wanted to purchase a distributor. That's when they started to buy companies and leverage debt on the company instead of just having a great licensing deal with Skybox or something. We had to buy Fleer instead of having a good toy licensing deal with Toy Biz. We had to buy Toy Biz. Every time we did that, all it did is drive up the debt on the company.
Yeah.
So that's why the bankruptcy was all just 100% bull. It was BS. It wasn't real. The debt they leveraged on the company was not reflective of the earnings the company was making.
Right.
So we were making $300 million a year in our publishing program, but they had leveraged the debt to the point where it was $800 million. You know what I mean? So then they're going to say we're bankrupt because our earnings can't cover the cost of our debt, but that debt wasn't incurred by Marvel Comics.
Right.
Technically, that debt was incurred by McAndrews and Forbes, the group that Perlman owned when he was purchasing all these companies.
A guy that I work with worked in at Toys R Us and was in a management position at Toys R Us. He described the Toys R Us bankruptcy and just going out of business in kind of the same way, which is interesting. When you were describing it, I was like, that sounds just like Toys R Us.
It is not. It is not a unique story. It is something Perlman had done to many companies, and it's something that a lot of people do quite often. You either break a company apart and sell it in pieces, which is like what Mitt Romney was a specialist at doing,
okay.
Or you purchase a lot of companies. Increase your debt while you're making a tremendous amount of money off of your shares because you've taken it public now. Marvel went public, don't forget.
Right.
So they're making a tremendous amount of money for themselves while they're incurring debt on the company, and it's not debt they're going to owe personally.
Yeah.
So he declared bankruptcy on Marvel, but he walked away with millions and millions of dollars in his own pocket. Perlman did. I tend to always put the adjectives scumbag Perlman before his name. Just so you know how I feel about this guy. I've never watched anything that Ellen Barkin has starred in ever since she married Perlman.
I got you.
And I know she divorced him years later, but I don't care. I'm not going to forgive her because she was buying diamonds off of friends of mine who were getting laid off. So
who
there
will
you go.
Who will play Perlman in the Marvel movie? Is there a person? Do you want to say that? You don't have to say that. So
I don't know that.
The casting.
Like a little bowl of scum could actually find the means of acting.
That's so good. So Cyforce. No, I'm just joking.
Wow, we're just up to Cyforce. It's only 1987.
I didn't know where else to go.
Jesus.
I didn't know where else to go after that. I just loved. I didn't expect that.
How do you go after Scumbag Perlman?
I love it. Well, I don't know where. I guess we'll just end this right now. Great job. And so good, so good, so entertaining. You came out of you're a manufacturing assistant when you started, and then you end up in charge of the entire all promotions, correct?
No, just one. I'm responsible for one part of it, but I had a boss I answered to. You know, Mark Erickson was heavily involved in all of that stuff. He was really, really good. He came up with some of our best ads that I thought that we did. He was really clever and smart with a phrase. I learned a lot from him. I made his life miserable because he preferred to go under the radar. He preferred not to make a lot of waves, and I was just the opposite.
Yeah.
But he was smart, and he knew how to use me too to push buttons when he wanted to push buttons. I learned a lot from Mark, and it was a really good working experience. I did the job, and I loved doing the job, but I realized after about 4 years of doing it, or 5 years of doing it, that it was a really heavy workload, and I wanted to try something different because I was starting to repeat myself. And Tom had been asking me to be an editor, and I had kind of turned him down twice. And Mark Grunwald stopped me in the hall and said, he's going to ask you again, just so you know, 3 strikes and you're out. If you don't want to do it the third time, he won't ask you again.
Right.
And whatever you want to do is fine. I just want you to know that. And I said, okay, fine. Thanks, Mark. And Tom asked me again a few days later. And I said, all right, this time I'll do it, but I don't want to edit superhero books because I'm writing too many of them. I want to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, hey, funny thing is, Sid Jacobson is leaving staff, so I need an editor for the Star line, and that's going to be you. And I'm like, oh, my God, you suck. So I got the Star line, which is all of Marvel's licensed books, and technically the younger reader line, although at that point we were even conceptualizing what that was going to mean.
Mm-hmm.
So I got hired as an editor, and my mandate really was to first and foremost to get Barbie to work. We had the Barbie license, and it had been almost a year, and they had not been able to get a comic off the ground because the editorial department, the editorial office was having too much trouble with Mattel getting something approved. So my main job was, number 1, get Barbie off the ground, and number 2, get my assistant editor Evan Skolnick ready to be an editor within a year, because Tom and Mark liked Evan a lot in terms of his editorial skills and his story skills. He was just a little rough around the edges in terms of his interaction skills. So they wanted me to basically prep him. I think Tom and Mark described it as, you're a schmuck, but you're a really smooth schmuck.
You're a
so
really
teach
smooth
Evan how to
schmuck.
be a smooth schmuck. So I said, okay, I'll do that. And that was initially my main goal. And then we got things like Ren and Stimpy, which I hired Dan Slott to write, and we had Mighty Mouse, and we had Bill and Ted's excellent comic book, which Evan Dorkin was brilliant on. It was a very challenging job. Anytime you have to deal with 7 or 8 licensors every single month on comics that need to be sent out of the office for approval before you can even turn them into production and get them turned into a comic book, it takes more time. It takes more steps. It takes a lot more massaging, a lot more political BS.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it was really great experience because I learned how to deal with a lot of outside companies. I worked a lot more with our publisher, Mike Hobson, which I might not have had I had another editorial job. I knew Mike better than most of the editors who had been there as editors years longer than I had, because I had to deal with him a lot because of the nature of the licensing deals. I got to go on more business trips that were business trips, not conventions or store appearances. I got to go out to LA to go to Mattel's offices and meet James Cameron when we were trying to do Terminator.
Cool.
I got to go to Chicago. I got to go to Canada a few times to meet some of the companies that were up there. So was a really good experience for me, and I got to do a lot of those trips with Mike Hobson or with Tom DeFalco, and it created a really good relationship, and it taught me a lot too. So I didn't like being an editor that much, but I gained very, very valuable experience being one.
And your first published work, like I said earlier, was Cyforce, is that right?
Yes, technically my first published work was a DC Comics Against the Meanwhile column that they paid me $25 for. That ran in an issue of Legion of Superheroes, but I forget what issue it was, in like 1982 or 83.
Oh, wow, okay.
Then I sold 2 articles for Marvel Age magazine when I first started at Marvel, so that was 1985 to early 86. 2 weeks into my job at Marvel, I had to interview Stan Lee for Marvel Age. So that was pretty cool and pretty intimidating. Cool. But there's a Marvel Age issue that Stan is a photo cover of Stan, and I did the article for that. I also did an article on Steve Geiger, an artist from the Ramita Raiders group in the bullpen, and Marvel Age would do articles to spotlight the Ramita Raider guys to try to get more people to be aware of them. So I did an article on Steve Geiger too. Those are the first 2 things of mine that Marvel published. But the first story I sold was actually a Spider-Man story. Oh. It was never drawn because the editor who bought the story was fired and the new editor didn't like the story, so I got a kill fee for it. But technically my first comic book sale at Marvel was a Spider-Man inventory story. Which never saw the light of day. My first published work was Cyforce. Cyforce #9, which came out in 1987.
And then you worked on the classic X-Men and then New Warriors.
Yeah, I had I got the monthly gig on Cyforce really quickly. I wrote 2 inventory stories that were published immediately because the scheduling was so bad on the New Universe books, and then Shooter made me the writer of Cyforce. Whether the editor wanted me or not made no difference. Shooter made me the writer of Cyforce. So I got my first monthly book within 6 months of selling my first story, cool. Which is really, really kind of quick. And then I thought I was golden. I wrote Cyforce for 16 issues, and I was selling some other inventory stories here and there to other titles. And I thought once Cyforce got canceled, I would get offers up the wazoo, and I would get to be writing a monthly book or 2. Yeah. And it just didn't happen. So I had my year of frustrated scut work, which was like 89, and I wrote a lot of inventory stories, a lot of annual backups. I wrote a bunch of Marvel Comics Present stories because they were commissioning stories way before the first issue of that even came out. So I sold a bunch of 8-page Marvel Comics Present stories. It was good. Actually, in hindsight, at the time, I was very frustrated. But in hindsight, it was really worth it because it forced me to have to tell stories in a variety of formats: 5 pages, 8 pages, 12 pages. They were all different page counts. So I learned a lot about being tighter with my structure. And then we knew that Danny Fingeroth was assigned New Warriors to develop, and I knew that it was in the pipeline, and I wanted it really, really badly. And Mark and Tom both told Danny to accept a pitch from me. Cool. That didn't mean Danny had to pick me, but right. they really recommended that he accept a pitch from me, and Danny did. And finally, it took several months, but Danny finally decided to hire me to write the book, and that was my big breakthrough. Really, even after being there for a few years, I'd been at Marvel almost 5 years at that point, but writing New Warriors was my big breakthrough because it allowed all the editors to see that I could write a mainstream Marvel superhero book. It was far better than anyone expected it was going to be. It sold far better than anyone expected it was going to sell. It made retailers aware of me as a name because I was selling a book for them that they didn't think was going to sell, and their customers were enjoying.
Yeah, the expectations were what? I mean, the New Warriors weren't a group. I mean, you basically got to
the expectations were really low. They were really low. I was going on the retailer retreats and the distributor meeting retreats with the direct sales department because I was also one of the few people at Marvel who could hold a microphone in their hand in front of an audience and talk about the comics. So I was presenting for Marvel at distributor meetings and retailer meetings and conventions and licensing shows. I was actually handed the mic and told to talk about the comics. So I would go on a lot of these different little forays, and I'd be I was at a meeting in Montreal, I'll never forget, where Carol Kalish, who was the head of direct sales department, she was a brilliant woman, but I wanted to hit her so hard, says, New Warriors is like Police Academy and the Avengers. It's like Avengers Academy.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm sitting next to her and I'm saying, this isn't what it is at all.
And you're like, how do I spin out of this?
I can't contradict her in front of the retailers because she's the head of Marvel's direct sales. So after she was done, I had to make my way through the cocktail hour and talk to every individual retailer and try to explain to them that it is nothing like Avengers Academy.
About what she said there.
And afterwards I explained to her. I said, Carol, do not say that again. Don't call it that again. It's not that. She hadn't seen anything from it yet. She thought it was a stupid idea, and she thought it was going to bomb. And that's fine. We always had our opinions about the books we were doing. I never begrudged anybody having an opinion about a book before they read it. I would have them myself, and I don't begrudge someone having an opinion after they read it. What I do begrudge is someone having an opinion of something they haven't read after it's already been coming out.
Just to torch things, just to torch things. I guess I should say that, and this is the Horrible Movie Podcast. So
well, that's exactly the
I'm
analogy.
Not too snarky. If you listen to an episode, I'm not too
torching
snarky.
A movie that you haven't seen, or hasn't come out yet.
Right.
So
and
anyway, I had to do a lot of damage control, which was a Dwayne McDuffie book, but that's a whole other matter. I had to do a lot of damage control to try to spin New Warriors just within the company itself.
Let's segue to Deadpool. You and Rob Liefeld co-created Deadpool. Tell folks about. I know you've told this story many times.
I've never been asked about Deadpool yet.
Ever, really? That's amazing. First time,
yeah,
folks.
Never. It's amazing because you'd think people would have asked me about it.
The first thing they asked.
We got the exclusive.
Technically, Rob Liefeld created Deadpool because there would be no character named Deadpool who looks like that if Rob Liefeld had not come up with using the name Deadpool and developing a costume design that was almost like a pseudo Spider-Man meets Taskmaster meets Deathstroke.
I love Taskmaster.
And Rob developed and designed the idea of a Spider-Man-like mercenary. And I said, okay, what's his personality? And Rob said, whatever you want. And I said, okay. And by the time I had to script it, I had a choice of making him gruff and tough, like everyone else in that book was, which I didn't feel like doing. I had the opportunity, which I regret not taking now, just to see what would have happened, to make him a silent assassin like Snake Eyes from G.I. Joe.
Snake Eyes, yeah.
And what I decided to do is to take something Rob said as a visual cue and turn it into a verbal cue. He described him as Spider-Man meets Punisher.
Cool.
And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if he was a mercenary who was an idiot and wouldn't shut up? And that was it. I had no game plan. I'm only scripting this book. I'm not plotting it. And I got 2 other books I'm writing every month, and I got a full-time job. So I apologize. I'm not going to give too much thought to worrying about the long-term ramifications of making Deadpool an idiot.
You did trademark the phrase "Merc with a mouth," and now you make $1 billion every year, right?
I make $1 billion a year off of trademarking "Merc with a mouth." Marvel, I snuck one by Marvel's lawyers. I didn't even realize that I had trademarked that term. That actually didn't come until like 1994 when I was writing the credits for the Deadpool #1 issue of his Circle Chase miniseries. I just called him Marvel's Merc with a Mouth,
right?
Because as I was writing, mercenary with a mouth didn't have the same ring to it.
Right.
So I called them Merc with a Mouth, and it stuck.
Yeah,
so in essence, I mean, Rob created Deadpool, but Deadpool exists because of the way I decided to write him and the backstory I gave him and the details I gave him. You just have to imagine Deadpool without the cancer, without the skin condition, without the insanity, without the cultural touchstone references. and then you ask yourself, is that Deadpool? And the answer is no, it's not. So the truth is, Rob created him, but I co-created him, which is why I'm legally a co-creator of the character. Nobody had a problem back then with that. Some people seem to have a little bit of a problem now, but you know, that's their problem, not mine.
What do you think about the 2 Deadpool movies?
I think they suck. I think they're awful. I think Ryan Reynolds is a joke. And all that's left for him to do now is, like, I don't know, I guess do a voiceover for Pikachu or something.
That's all he has to do.
That's all he has left. And to sell gin. What a loser. I think the movies have been great. I think they've done a really good job. I like the first one more than the second one, but I like the second one just fine.
Cool.
Sequels are tougher, and they had a lot of things to juggle, but they still made it a fun movie. I hope that they do a lot more, because I get a check every time they make a movie. So I want them to make a movie a week. So you know, I don't care if they're good or bad, because I'm not being asked to write, direct, or act in them.
Right.
Although I originally was going to play Vanessa in the movie, but they decided to go with Marina instead.
Really? Well, that's
I thought
wow.
You know, I
I'm
thought
sorry
it was,
about that.
Let me just say this: I thought it was the safe call. Okay?
It was a safe call. You could have really jazzed it up.
I could have brought something very different to the role.
Yes, it would have been a different take on the character.
Shoulder hair and leg hair. I could have brought. So you know, at the end of the day, I have no control over the quality of it. I don't care. I have no control. I want it to be good, but if it's not, I have no control over it. I can't do anything about it. Look, it's his appearance in Wolverine Origins was just a travesty, and it sucked. And I had no control over that. And so I allowed myself to be able to walk away from it without any worries, because when you're not involved in something, you have no control over it, you can't get too worried about it, right? And the fact that the last 2 have been good, I also have no control over. I have no say in. So I'm glad they're good, but I walk out of the theater and I'm done. I just want my check at the end of the year, because that's what I wanted. That to me, that's the true recognition of being Deadpool's co-creator, when Marvel has to write you a check. That huge, in essence is the true creative gift.
So when you guys first were writing those first issues of Deadpool, which is actually in New Mutants, he was just a straight up villain, right? Like he was just the bad guy.
He was a villain, but the minute you make him funny, then automatically readers gravitate towards him. Yeah. Readers immediately gravitated towards him. One reason why we knew that we had something right off the bat, don't forget, we made him one of 5 trading cards in X-Force #1, even though he wasn't appearing in the issue. The reason we did that is because the mail response to 98 was so phenomenal, and so much of the mail mentioned how much they liked that guy.
Yeah, and these are handwritten letters, folks that are listening. These are not emails.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to cater to the frickin' embryos out there, okay? Exactly. Yes, letters. Yes. Unbelievable. Okay, mail, letters. I'm not going to do a half-hour drunk history on what letters are.
Tell us, Grandpa, about these letters. Sorry.
So tell me about stamps.
Tell me, how's the post office work?
So the fan reaction was so overwhelming and positive
that we knew we had something,
and
Rob was going to bring him back anyway, because Rob liked to draw him. Cool. The reason Rob really liked to draw him is because he didn't have to draw a face, and he had to draw a face on every character in that book, because it was a team book with no masks. So Eric Larson and Todd McFarlane were making fun of him all the time because he had to draw so many faces. So Rob wanted to have a character that just was an oval with big eyes.
Cool.
And so we were going to bring him back, but where he's a villain in a subplot, and he didn't really get a chance to get fleshed out until after Rob had already left, until we finally got to schedule the Circle Chase miniseries. It took a while for that to come out. It came out in '94, but we were already working on it in really early '93, I think it was. It's just that Joe Madureira was a very slow young artist. He was only like 18 years old at the time, and he was very slow. So we had to wait until Rob was done and had left, so that that Deadpool villain subplot could be concluded. and then I had to plan the miniseries, and I had to answer a lot of questions, because after Rob had left, I had to answer questions. Why is he the way he is? Why does he have a healing factor? Why did he go to the Weapon X program to begin with? And that's when we started to flesh out a lot of those things in the first miniseries. Yeah. I wanted to show him without his mask in that first miniseries, and the editor, Bob Harris, said no. So all we could show is little hints of how horrible he looked.
Slow reveal, yeah.
But we didn't get to show his actual face, which I wanted to do.
Cool. Of all the Marvel stuff you've written Deadpool, X-Men, Spider-Man, Captain Marvel, New Mutants, New War. The list goes on. What's your favorite of all the Marvel things you've worked on?
Probably New Warriors is number one, because it meant a lot to me. It meant a lot to my career. I loved the characters, and I loved what we developed and built. Mm-hmm. I loved working with Mark Bagley and with Derek Robertson. A second would probably be Cable and Deadpool.
Cool.
Because I got to write both characters the way I saw them, without almost any editorial engagement. And not my editor, Nicole Boos, was really, really good, and she was on top of it. But when I say editorial engagement, what I'm really saying is any interest whatsoever on the part of Marvel that they were publishing a book called Cable and Deadpool. Yes. I got to work for 50 issues in a corner that they weren't paying attention to, which was just a gift. To be able to write a book that the company doesn't care about is wonderful. Because if they don't pay attention to you, you pretty much get to do whatever you and your editor decide you want to do, and your artist. And that was a tremendous amount of fun. So other than making Nicole have to talk to the Marvel lawyers every single month, it was a really, really great experience. And I didn't have to talk to the lawyers, so I didn't care. Only she did. Because every script I would throw in at least 7 things, knowing I wanted to get away with 2 of them, so I put 5 worse things in there. And the lawyers would come down and complain about the 5 worst things, and I'd sneak in the 2 things that I wanted to get away with to begin with.
That's awesome. What's your favorite? You worked for DC, or you worked for DC? I
did. I worked for DC on and off in bits and pieces after 1994, but then I was on contract with them from 2008 to 2013.
Yeah.
And by far Tim Drake. Tim Drake. I could write Tim Drake forever. I love the character. I always love the character. I love what Marv Wolfman and Chuck Dixon created out of him. And I loved writing his comic. I got to write Robin for like 9 issues or so, and then I got to write Red Robin for a year before I got New 52'd. Which is, quite frankly, just so you know, it is like a disease that you can track. When you get New 52,
right,
all reason, hope, and faith goes out the window.
Well, and I saw recently I saw a commercial. It's like one of those a medicine commercials, like a pharmaceutical commercial. If you've been New 52'd, and then I can't remember the name of the drug that they were trying to sell.
Well, I'll tell you one of the side effects: painful rectal bleeding. When you hear them say that, or you watch it scroll at 50 miles an hour on your screen, then you know you're in trouble with this drug. They cause painful rectal bleeding. Wait, what was that? Hold on. Pause the screen for a second. What was that? New 52 did cause painful rectal bleeding.
What would the name of the drug be that would fix the New 52, though?
Think of it. I think it's called the diohirositis or something. I'm pretty sure it's called the diohirositis.
Oh, gosh. Hey, Azrael, by the way. Awesome. And you get to write, how much Azrael did you get to write?
I think I quit with issue 6.
Right. But,
was it 6?
Little used.
Yeah, I wasn't that happy with that book. I wasn't that happy with Batwing. I wasn't happy with a lot of the side stuff.
I get that. Okay,
that
I
had to
understand
do. A lot of it I was doing as a favor because Mike Martz was the editor and he was asking me, and I love Mike and I love working with Mike.
That's cool.
And I was under contract, so when they ask you to do something when you're under contract, you kind of got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't really what I wanted to be writing. I could have really enjoyed writing Legion Lost if I'd been allowed to write Legion Lost the way they asked me to write Legion Lost, which is absolutely nothing like what came out in print.
Gotcha.
But because I love those characters, I mean I love those Legion characters. I grew up reading the Cockrum Grell Legion stories from the early 70s. So, Dawnstar, Wildfire, Timberwolf. I mean, there's some of my favorite characters that DC has, and getting a chance to write them is something that I was very, very interested in. But I saw really, really quickly that this was not going to work. And I actually quit Legion Lost with the third issue. But Brian Cunningham, the editor, really asked me if I could please stay on at least through the first 6 so that they could have a complete trade paperback, and that it wouldn't look good if they'd already fired a couple writers with issue 1s, and they thought it wouldn't look good if someone with my history in the industry quit after 3 issues, because they knew what that would say about what was going on. And I said, all right, I'll stay through issue 6, but I wasn't very happy to stay through issue 6. And it's a real shame, because Pete Woods was the artist, and he's an absolutely fantastic artist, excellent storyteller, and he did a really good job. It had the book sucking had absolutely nothing to do with him, and it barely had anything to do with me. So it was disappointing, because if you had told 11-year-old Fabian Nicieza that one day he's going to get to write all these Legion characters trapped in time in the present day of the DC universe, what do you think 11-year-old Fabian would have said? Exactly. I would have just freaking dove headfirst at the chance. So the fact that it was a very emotionally frustrating year to work on that crap. And it really it actually soured me quite a bit to comics. I used that as my decision to comfortably walk away from worrying about writing regular comics as my main source of income. And I haven't needed or wanted comics to be my main source of income for over 10 years.
Cool. You have about 5 minutes to talk about a movie, and then another 5 to answer some quick fire fan questions.
Okay.
Is that cool?
What movie do you want to talk about?
Okay, I'll let you pick: Batman versus Superman or Return of the Jedi.
Wow, that's like choosing between painful rectal bleeding and painful eye bleeding. Let's not choose Batman versus Superman, because I don't need the Snyderites listening to begin a harassment campaign against me.
Sounds good.
Because I think Zack Snyder kind of sucks. So I don't need that.
Well, let's get the George Lucas haters. We'll get on our side.
There's no Lucasites out there, so
there are none of those.
Well, but here's the thing, though. I am not a fan of the Star Wars franchise. I have not really enjoyed a Star Wars movie since Empire Strikes Back.
Okay.
I was in the movie theater a week and a half after the original Star Wars came out watching it, so I predate 90% of the Star Wars man boys who are going to complain about something. I don't like Return of the Jedi for the reasons that the man boys cry about it. I don't like Return of the Jedi because I think it sucks.
Is it the Ewoks? Is it the Ewoks, maybe?
No, you know what? Actually, it's a funny question. The Ewoks were almost like the whipped cream and the cherry on top of the sundae of crap that had already been built in that movie.
So you can't blame,
okay? You know what it was?
Ewoks.
You know when you want to know the moment Star Wars lost me
I'm so
and has never been able to reclaim me?
Please tell me.
And I've seen every single movie in the theater. I don't watch the side stuff or the Clone Wars cartoons and all that.
Right.
But I've still seen every single movie in the theater. Okay,
look at you,
including Solo now. All right, so I don't not watch them. So my opinion is not based on lack of having been exposed to this stuff. All right, Return of the Jedi lost me the second that Boba Fett got his rocket pack hit by blind Han Solo,
Gotcha.
and he flew into the side of a friggin' floating frigate and fell into a giant sand. That was it. That was it. That was the moment
I've
they
never
lost.
heard the Sarlacc called that before.
I've been calling it a giant sandwich since 1983.
And how mad were you? How mad were you when you watched that? You're just like, I cannot believe this just happened.
I remember to this day how I felt sitting in the theater. I said, "You got to be kidding me!" And that was before the Ewoks even came on screen.
That's true.
All right. And the reason I said you got to be kidding me is because they allowed that character of Boba Fett to be built up among the fan base, and it was an illusion. So their decision to do what they did either meant one of two things.
Yes.
They didn't have a backstory that made this guy the coolest mercenary in the world, in the universe, and as a result, didn't care enough to develop that and show it to us, number one.
Right.
Or number two, because they saw how much the fans had gotten excited about this make-believe character for no reason other than their own desire to get excited about this character,
right.
They purposefully chose to have him eaten by a giant sandwich after he got taken out by a blind Han Solo, okay? And then that means there's no respect for their audience.
Ooh,
so in that moment, I was like 21 years old, and I'm watching it, and I want to become a writer, and I'm watching this, and I thought, here's my two choices. Either they don't care enough about their story world, or they don't care about their fans. Neither one of them has a good answer, does it?
That's true.
So that's when they lost me. And
Makes sense.
And they never got me back.
Well,
because in my opinion, 90% of Star Wars fandom is a building built on sand. There's no foundation to it. It's indescribable detail that is not built on a foundation of story structure, character development, consistency, of continuity, all of that stuff. So we add more to that building than they do, in my opinion.
Well, and
the fans build it up to being something that the movies are not.
That's why so many people, whenever they kind of got rid of and retconned all of the novels, basically from the previous novels, they basically said those aren't canon. They basically, they're not canon. Everyone just lost their minds, like they were upset about that. So
yeah, and it was a stupid, unnecessary move. But I find it especially ironic considering that they're so bad at maintaining their continuity anyway. What the hell do they care whether the novels are continuity or
true.
not?
Yeah.
A guy at the office today, I went into the office. I go in a couple days a week freelancing for the company that does a lot of IP development work and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And this one kid in the office, he's the youngest one in the office, and he's a huge Star Wars fan. He's only like 24 years old, but he said, I said something about I never agreed with Yoda. There, do or do not. There is no try. I think somebody did something and they failed, and I think it was shooting a basket, like something into the wastebasket, and they missed, and he goes, "Oh, I tried," and like I never agreed with Yoda. Do or do not. There is no try. I think there is try. And then this other guy, David, goes. A Sith does not believe in absolutes.
What?
And I said, wait a minute. Yoda said there do or do not. There is no try. That's an absolute. And he goes, saying a Sith believes in there are no absolutes is an absolute.
Yes.
So you're contradicting yourself either way. So both sides of the Force are full of you can bleep me out again.
We'll bleep you on that. That's fine. Gosh. All right.
Both sides of the Force are full of painful rectal bleeding.
There you go. Well, it's sponsored by the New 52. God. All right.
Sponsored by the Sarlacc.
Sponsored by Sarlacc.
When you absolutely positively have to be eaten by a giant sandwich tonight.
Okay. Well, how about some fan questions?
I would love some fan questions.
Our friend Jerry McMullen, who is one of the hosts on the Worst Comic Podcast Ever.
That's a selling point. That
Well, I
title.
mean, you're talking to the guys on the Horrible Movie Podcast, so
That's different, though. You're talking about horrible movies. It's not the movie Horrible podcast.
that's true.
It's a horrible podcast
Well,
movie.
I've listened to Jerry's podcast. It's great, so you should listen.
Okay.
And it's not the worst comic podcast
They're very
ever.
self-deprecating.
Yeah, it's very self-deprecating, much like a Sarlacc. He has several questions. We've actually hit a lot of those already. This is an interesting one. NFL Super Pro, when do we get a reboot?
You're gonna have to talk to Marvel and the NFL about that. I prefer not to hold my breath for these exciting things because I'll run out of breath. So I'll wait for them to call me. How about I say that?
Gotcha. And another one of Jerry's questions we've already covered, but one of his questions was which was your favorite Robin to write, and you already said Tim Drake.
No, well, that's not. We covered how much I loved writing Tim Drake. Dick Grayson is my favorite comic book character in all comics, and he has been since I was like 6 years old.
That's awesome.
Dick Grayson, whether he's Robin or Nightwing or Batman, I love the character of Dick Grayson. I haven't gotten to write him that much, but I've gotten to write him a few times, and I loved getting that opportunity. If I had a choice of writing a monthly Dick Grayson book or a monthly Tim Drake book, and I could only choose one, I would choose Dick Grayson. But that doesn't mean I don't like Tim tremendously, and I loved writing Red Robin. But Dick Grayson's still my number one character. He has been since I was 6 years old.
That's cool. A friend of our show, Ian Ross, asks this. The decision to kind of transition Deadpool from an antagonist to a protagonist, when did that kind of come about? I mean, kind of in the way
The second he had his own logo. Simple as that. The second that you put a villain in a book that he is starring in and he has or she has their own logo, whether that be Punisher, whether that be Deadpool, whether that be Venom, the minute you do that, they go from being antagonist to being protagonist because they have to become the protagonist of their own story. So you do that by pitting them against villains that are worse than they are. You do that by softening their edges a little bit or complicating their conflict a little bit. And it's very easy to follow the track of doing that. You know, the minute that Deadpool was in his own book and he's going up against Juggernaut and Black Tom, you're rooting for Deadpool against Juggernaut and Black Tom for the most part. Gotcha. So he's automatically the protagonist. That doesn't mean he's the hero. That doesn't mean he's a hero. But it does mean he's the protagonist of his own book, and that's because the logo has a little trademark by it, and that means that the company's interest is in.
They've got investment in it.
In paying attention to that character.
And then here's one last question. Our friend P.A. Browning asked this: what advice would you have for someone who's just starting out with a story concept? And maybe what are some obstacles they're going to run into? Well,
it depends on whether they're writers or artists or whether it's comic books or something else.
Let's say they're
that's too broad a question.
Let's say it's an author. Let's just say it's an author.
Yeah, the writer side.
The writer side.
Well, I mean, if you want to write a comic book and you have an idea for a comic book, my first recommendation would be to find an artist who would be willing to draw your comic book, because unlike what many people seem to think nowadays, comic books are not just done by writers. They also include a penciler, often an inker, a colorist, and a letterer. Yeah. So you have to work with a creative team. You can't be a comic book writer if you don't have an artist to draw the comic book.
I'm with you.
Because then it's not a comic book. It's either a prose story or it's a blank page with script on it.
Or a blog. Maybe a blog. So, maybe it's a blog. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a comic book. Okay. So that would be my recommendation. And then you if you're working with someone, then you have to figure out what their strengths are and what's best for them. Is it better to work full script? Is it better to work plot first because they're very dynamic visual storytellers? They're bringing a lot of ideas to the table, or is it something that you have so anally, meticulously prepared in your brain that you could dot every T and cross every I before you even begin the process. Then, of course, it's got to be a full script because you're an auteur and you know exactly what you're doing. But let me tell you, I lean more towards the Marvel plot method myself because I think it makes for much more dynamic collaboration than full script does. And I've been doing this for 30 years, and 15 of that was plot first, and 15 of that has been full script. And I still prefer plot first. But you need to work with someone and flesh it out with someone, preferably, because again, comics is a collaborative medium.
Okay, two quick things before we let you go. What is the worst movie you've ever seen in a theater, other than maybe Return of the Jedi? Maybe you've already said this.
No, I don't think Return of the Jedi is the worst movie I've ever seen in theater. That's a tough one. I can't even imagine. I tend to like just block out the really bad ones, but because I usually don't go to a movie that I know is really bad or I heard is really
maybe most
bad.
disappointed. You know what I mean? Is there
so
maybe a most disappointed?
So that's a better question. So the movie that you're most disappointed in. My first answer would probably be Moonraker. Because after Spider Love Me, I was expecting a lot more out of Roger Moore's James Bond than Moonraker gave me. Moonraker began the process of turning it into a shtick comedy with Roger Moore as Bond. After that, my next biggest disappointment was probably Superman 3. When I saw Superman 3, I was crushed because again, it was shtick. My next one after that was probably the Burton Batman. It was incredibly disappointing to me. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't hold it up to the standards of being brilliant excellence the way some people nowadays seem to.
No, I'm not being critical of your opinion.
A tremendous amount of disappointment.
I don't hear that. I don't hear that very often. So.
And most recently, though, certainly Batman versus Superman was one of the singular most disappointing experiences I've had in the theater in a long time.
Yeah, the tone of it.
The existence of it. I really like Ben Affleck as Batman. I really like Henry Cavill as Superman.
I do too.
I really like Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
I really like nothing about that movie.
So weird. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Is there anything you would like to promote or talk about before we let you go?
My new series, Outrage, which is a digital comic book appearing on Webtoon, just completed its first season, which is 26 chapters, which is roughly the equivalent of about 130 to 140 page story. I co-created it with Riley Brown, who I did Cable and Deadpool with. Webtoon is a free digital platform. You can read it for free. Just go sign up on Webtoon and then do a search engine for Outrage, because it's almost like the Netflix of comics. Mm-hmm. You can get lost in a sea of how much content is on there. But Outrage is a really entertaining, enjoyable, and interesting 26-chapter serial about a character that can come out of your social media device and beat the crap out of you if you're being an on social media.
That's very scary.
Dude, I'm totally checking that out.
And we are negotiating season 2 right now. There's no guarantee we'll have one because we're talking about business discussions now.
Yes.
And sometimes those don't work out. Yeah. But the response was very, very strong. More people have read Outrage than any comic I've written for Marvel or DC in the last 15 years.
Cool.
We had 40 to 50,000 readers on a weekly basis. And the platform and the format, the vertical scroll format's a lot of fun. So I'm very happy with how it came out. I'm very happy with the story. There's more story we can tell, but if we don't get a second season, I'm very satisfied with this as a self-contained unit.
I'm very interested with comics that are digital only, that's the only way to experience the comic, just because it almost feels like a different medium entirely from paper comics.
It very much is. It honestly very much is. And Riley is an expert at horizontal scroll to the point where Marvel was asking them to lay out their digital comics for other artists to draw because Riley just understood what needed to be done. He was talking to me about digital comics stuff back in 2009, 2008, when we were working on Cable and Deadpool together. So he's really, really good at this stuff. We also did the Deadpool and Cable split second digital comic for Marvel. The vertical scroll is a completely different thing, and he had to relearn a lot because we're used to horizontal scroll, and it's a completely different beast than a vertical scroll. And it took us a few chapters to really understand the format and how it paces and how your finger moves the panel, so how much room to give between panels and where to place
that's true.
And how to have dialogue slowly flow from one panel to the next. It took us a little while to do that, but I think by chapter 6 or so we started to get a much more comfortable handle on what we wanted to do and how we wanted to handle it. And I think that you see that confidence grow in the book as you're reading it. And coming out weekly is also fascinating too, because by the end of the run, we were so tight on the schedule and we were so determined to have each chapter come out every week, like we'd agreed to, because so few people are able to do that. And none of the North American launches they launched in the fall were able to consecutively release all of their chapters, even close to the level we did. The last chapter that came out last Tuesday, I scripted it on Sunday. It was lettered on Monday. The inker finished page 5 on Monday, and the colors finished page 5 on Tuesday afternoon, and it dropped online Tuesday at 9:00 Eastern time.
I was going to ask you about that.
I've never ever had the experience where even with the latest of late comics, it would still take a few weeks before it got to the stands. I never had the experience where something I created was live and being read a day or two later. It was really, really kind of cool. Now, again, that's only the result of being so late on the schedule that the last 5 or 6 weeks, the guys were really busting their humps to turn this thing around every week, and they did it too. And without skimping the quality, they just really worked hard. And that Riley Brown, Jay Leaston was our inker, Pat Brousseau was our letterer, and Matt Herms was our colorist, and all of them did really, really good work. So it was a lot of fun in that regard.
I don't know how many of our listeners really even understand how rare and how unusual that is in the comic world. That anything in DC or Marvel that's going to print, they've finished the story and all the art is done months before it ever actually hits the shelves.
That's kind of like an idealistic like hope. That's a desire. The truth of the matter is that most books are leaving the Marvel offices or the DC offices at 3 weeks from shipping. It used to be in the old days 8 weeks from shipping. Gotcha. Then if you got it out 4 weeks from shipping, it was really, really tight. But most books seem to be leaving now like 3 weeks from shipping. There's occasionally a book that will leave 2 weeks from shipping or 1 week from shipping, and it gets out on time. Wow. None of that equates to Matt Herms like contacting us going, I just finished coloring this page 5 o'clock and it's live at 9 o'clock.
Jeez.
I've heard of I've sat in some panels with some other comic book creators, and they're saying that people are accusing them of like making issue 15 a response to what fans wrote in after reading 14, and they're like, hey, we had 15 written, printed, not printed, but like ready to go to print before we even read the comments on 14, and they were a month apart. But you guys were actually able to. I mean, I'm not saying you necessarily always react to fans, but
there's actually a funny bit about that. There's sections of the story in the back half of the season 1 that take place inside the internet, and one of the characters is basically controlling the programming code that everyone else is accessing. So his font looked different. His lettering font, we called it the Kenny God font, and Pat Brousseau chose a really kind of archaically formal font to use for the Kenny God font. And the first chapter we used it was okay. We were fine with it because it was only a few balloons that chapter. But then we had to use it again, and we realized, wow, this is like hard to read. It's just it's white lettering on green balloon, and the letters are tough to read. And Pat agreed, and we all agreed. The readers also agreed. And I said, well, you know what? It's only going to happen. I think it's only going to appear one more time in God font. So we're going to stick with it. Even though we're not happy with it, we're going to stick with it because we want consistency. Well, it turned out that it was going to be a little more than that, as the way the story just broke itself down. So I purposefully had the character not have the God font anymore and have a story reason why he didn't have the God font anymore. And that was really in response to all of the readers complaining about the God font.
That's cool.
So that all happened in like a 3-week period, So we responded immediately in many ways to the reader complaint. And because there's Webtoon, after every chapter, there's message boards on the Webtoon site. Yeah. So you see your readers' comments right there once the chapter's over. So we saw how many people were complaining about the God font, and it's a legitimate complaint. And then we also saw how many people were happy when we changed the God font and got rid of it. So that immediacy is kind of cute when you can do something like that.
Cool.
Again, that's Outrage on webtoons.com. I'm definitely going
to check that out. You go to webtoon.com, or you download the app for free on your phone or your iPad. You can subscribe for free, and you can read the vast majority of their content for free. There's a lot of stuff from creators all over the world. The site is hugely popular with teenage girls because there's a lot of romance on it. But there's also a lot of science fiction, fantasy, mystery. There's some interesting stuff on it. I was very pleasantly surprised by the diverse amount of material that they have. Not the least of which they have the best comic book of 2018 that you never heard of, which is Outrage.
Woo.
Cool.
Oh, yeah. Well, man, Fabian, thank you so much.
My pleasure, awesome. Guys. This was a lot of fun. You guys were great.
Well, and you, man, so generous with your time. We owe you. And when we see you at Planet Comic-Con in Kansas City, I want to give you something. I'm trying to think of what something nice I can give you for.
I think possibly getting me a beer at the bar would be a really good start.
Okay, all right. Okay, we'll start there.
It's a deal.
Well, that's a deal. We'll make
See how hard that was?
No, well, I didn't want to impose, but I really appreciate. We really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure, guys. You guys are really, really good too. It was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you so much, and you're the best, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. I will see you guys in a few weeks. Okay.
All right.
We'll
cool,
see you
buddy.
there.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. The Horror Movie Podcast is heard weekly on great stations like 88.1 KZ88, South Central Missouri's Public Radio, 104.1 Caps Media in Ventura, California, 103.5 WADR, Janesville, Wisconsin, and 105.5 KFGM, Missoula, Montana, from Missouri to Missoula. The Horror Movie Podcast is available for download on iTunes, Google Play, Spreaker, and at thehorrormoviepodcast.com.
Lowe's knows you'll do it right to save big on your to-do list. We do it right, too, with savings during our Memorial Day sale, so you can start checking off your list and save, too. Now get select 2.5-quart perennials 3 for $12 in store only. And keep your yard looking its best and save $100 on a Greenworks 60-volt string trimmer and blower combo kit, now just $199. Do it right for less. Start with Lowe's. Offers valid through 5/22. See store for details. U.S. only. Perennial offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii.
Your hands were made for greatness. Mighty hands for painting, paneling, and precisely clicking the order button on HomeDepot.com to get that duvet. Oh, and those Egyptian cotton towels delivered to your door. Do more with decor. This Memorial Day, shop Home Decorators Collection, Laura Ashley, Nautica, and the Company Store, and save up to 30% on select bedding and bath. The Home Depot. More saving, more kinds of doing. Valid on select items online only through May 29th. Free delivery on select items $45 or more. Visit HomeDepot.com for more information.